ready now.
Brilliant, cool. Welcome to tonight's event, everyone. This is a BBC Question Time style event. I figure most people have seen the event and what it's sort of like on either live or on BBC iPlayer. My name is Marco and I'll be chairing the debate tonight. Joining me on the panels we have Miss Marie Blundell, who is the Liberal Democrat candidate for Guildford. We have Mrs. Anne Milton, who's the current Conservative MP for Guildford. We have Richard Wilson, who's the current Labour candidate for Guildford. We also have Miss Miriam Kennet, who is the Green MEP candidate for the South East of England. And we also have Patricia Culligan, thank you very much for coming with such short notice, who is also the UKIP MEP candidate for the South East. So, the structure of tonight's event is, as I said, it will be very similar to a question time style event, and of course, members of the audience have sent in the questions, the panel haven't seen them. And after discussing the four main questions, I will open up the panel to a Q&A session with the audience. So if you have any topics or questions which haven't been covered yet by either any of the panelists, you can ask them those questions. So without much further ado, I think we should begin. So can we have the first question, please? First question.
What's your vision on higher education, and how do you deliver value for money considering the increase in fees?
Okay. So what is your party's vision on higher education, and how do you deliver the money considering increase in fees, value for money? The Lib Dems, you can go first on this one since you might have a bit of explaining to do.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, Marco. How do you deliver value for money? That's always going to be the balance. When the Liberal Democrats took position in coalition, we had a vision for completely free higher education, as many of you know. However, a coalition is about negotiation. Now, let's not forget that the Conservative manifesto in 2010 had uncapped tuition fees, and the Labour manifesto in 2010 had tuition fees of £27,000. What the Liberal Democrats did within the coalition is ensure that there was a cap. And not only that, but that it is the most progressive repayment system in the Western country. Now, that's not to say my vision wouldn't be free education, but Labour most certainly left the country in a significant economic deficit, and we have to balance those books somewhere. If we have to reduce public spending, then it has to come off that, or it comes off NHS, or it comes off disability payments. All of these things have to be balanced, and that is the nature of government. In the event that we do get the economy going better, we should be in a position to actually return to better education, free education. But at the moment, with the position the country is in economically, we can't achieve that.
And Anne Milton, since it was your party, in your party's manifesto, would you wish to defend sort of the rise?
I think, well, the question was about value for money, actually, and I think the important thing to say is nothing's free. You pay for it, whether you pay for it out of your pocket directly or through taxation. So if you don't pay for higher education, somebody's paying for it somewhere along the line. It would come out of general taxation. I think in terms of value for money, you're probably the best drivers of value for money. And I think one of the big, there have been several changes since 2010. One is that I think that the student bodies across the country, not just the Students' Union, but student bodies associated with universities have become much more critical. They've offered actually a good challenge to universities because actually they're running up a debt and they pay for this and they want to know that they're getting good value for money. And I think that the decisions students take now when they leave school is exactly on that basis. Is this investment of £9,000 a year plus all the other costs worth it for me? I've got 4 children, interestingly. My 2 eldest went to university when fees were £3,200. Interestingly, my daughter has not gone to university. My youngest son is taking a gap year because that is exactly the decision that he's making. Is it good value for money for the country? Without a doubt. We're competing in a global economy. We've got to have students who can compete in the world out there. What I do feel quite strongly about, and actually I'm pleased, although it's not directly related to your question, it is for me, and that is the growth of apprenticeships, which I think has been a terribly valuable addition to the higher further education sector. Really important, and in fact we're just starting, I think, to see universities catching up with that, and business, and sponsoring people through university.
And what's UKIP's policy on tuition fees?
Well, quite frankly, we think in a country that's the 6th largest economy in the world, that to charge our young people for studying at higher education level really is a bit of a disgrace. So we don't believe in student fees, and we don't believe that you should come out of university owing something round about £50,000, which means you'll never have a deposit for a house, you'll never be able to afford anything, and you're paying to equip yourself to take part in the difficult employment situation that we have for people in this country under the age of 26. Now, it's quite right, the value for money means that there is a cost, but if you do your course, you qualify in the profession that you want to work in, you will be repaying those fees through the tax that you pay. And we think that that's quite sufficient. So we want to offer, and we will go back to a time that we've offered, that this has been offered before, of free education for all young people. And where will the cuts come? Well, there won't be quite so many courses. We'll be an awful lot more careful about which courses are offered to students. We'll make sure that those courses offer value for money, that they offer routes into real jobs, and that they prepare people to take on the challenges of the world. And I don't think that that's at all unrealistic. One of the first ways of doing that will be to have a jolly good look at the salaries and perks of the top management in all our institutions, which are, quite frankly, astronomical, far more than David Cameron gets paid, and I think that's somewhere we could make a jolly good start.
And Richard Wilson, Labour mentioned that they might reduce the fees to £6,000. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's right. And let's remember what happened in 2010. Before the last general election, we had all the Liberal Democrat candidates across the country signing in blood in front of NUS offices that they would not vote to increase fees. They were elected and then they voted to treble them as we were getting into power. So not only did they harm value for money, they harmed the credibility of the whole electoral system, and this might be before some of you were at university. But what they did then has basically harmed politics. Now, you talked about value for money. It is value for money, and it's a solid investment for this country to make sure that 50% of young people can go to university, and that's what the last Labour government set about doing. Now, 50% of the middle class have always gone to university, but Labour set about making it accessible so that 50% of everyone can go to university. And we did introduce tuition fees at a modest level, at about £3,000, and we would reduce them as much as the economy will allow, probably to £6,000 maximum per year next time. And I'm talking again about value for money. The £9,000 a year fees, most of you will never pay off all of your university fees. About 50% of students will never pay it off. So the government will lose out by charging so much. This came out a few weeks ago, some research on this which you may have seen. So because you don't start paying it back until you reach a certain level, and then you only pay it back while you're working, when your salary is above a certain level, most of you will not pay off all of your fees. So the government loses out. So it's not value for money. It stops people accessing higher education. And Lib Dems promise never to vote against, signed in blood, never to vote for rising in tuition fees. Breaking that promise has just harmed the credibility of politics in the UK.
And Miriam, Kennet, what's your party's position on this?
Yeah, well, it's quite interesting. I had a look today at what different countries are charging for degrees, and the same degree is about 150 quid in France. It's free in Norway, and in this country the same degree is about 32,000. So I think the question of value for money is really pertinent, because if we've got to compete in the global economy, we're competing actually not just with Europe, but we're competing with the newer economies. And I was doing some work last year with the Indonesian government and the educational attaché. And Indonesia is a typical example of a new country, or not a new country, but it's a rapidly changing country with a lot of young people, a huge number of young people, and they're spending up to about 15 or 20% of their budget on education. And we've got to compete with that. And actually, forcing our young people to spend such a lot of money on education or discouraging them, I think is a really false economy, a really dangerous route to have. And we can't compete in the new changed economy. So I would argue very strongly that we need to offer education at the point of need. It's not just about getting that immediate job or professional education. We need a creative workforce, we need educated, questioning young people. And that may be one of the reasons why we've got difficulties and disillusionment amongst young people. People need to really have an education that equips them for life, not just for their jobs. And I think it's really important that we start thinking much more creatively about education and that we pay for our young people and make sure that everyone has the right and the opportunity to have the education that suits them for their lives.
Yes, just to pick up on what Richard said, the government won't lose out. I mean, you know, your university degree is a good value for the government will benefit and the people in this country will benefit. I think that there is, I would agree with you on education that equips people for life, which is why I'm quite keen on the focus on apprenticeships, because I think university doesn't suit everybody, and I think there was a drive to push everybody through university. We still need people going through university, but not everybody. I think there's an intrinsic fairness issue for me, is that if you don't charge students, then it'll come out of general taxation. And I'm not sure that it's appropriate for people who don't go to university to pay for people who do go to university. And that's the problem for me. I think that if participation had been affected, I'd be more worried. In fact, participation and applications continue to rise. And interestingly, in now, people from poorer backgrounds are twice as likely to go to university as they were in 2010.
But you do acknowledge that most people won't pay off their entire fees.
No, they won't, and you won't start paying till 21,000. And the calculations, financial calculations, are quite complex. But I think it is good value for money for the students that go. I think that is the decision they made. It's undoubtedly good value for money for the government, but on its own, it's not enough. There have to be other routes to education.
I just want to pick up UKIP on something which you briefly mentioned. You said you'd look at cutting courses, making them pay money, so they only focus on certain courses?
Not really, no. I mean, I'm a great believer in the in non-vocational training as incredibly important. I mean, I believe that university is a special time. It's not just about training to go straight into a job. I know that realistically we all have to be aware of that, we have to think that one through. But I'm a great believer in the courses that develop one's critical thinking, that allow you a few years just to sort of to read, to explore, to change opinions, to look at other people's opinions is immensely valuable. So I am very much in favour of, for example, you know, departments such as this one. And my own daughter is, at the moment, is a politics undergraduate, and my son has a degree in politics, so I would say that, wouldn't I? But I do truly believe that. So it's not about cutting the breadth of courses. It's much easier to look at the vocational courses and say, yes, that's great. And they are more money spinners for the government because of the even more astronomical amounts they charge to foreign students. So that's a different thing altogether. But I do feel as though there are some courses that are not good value for money, where students rarely see their tutor, where they have very little in the way of one-to-one interaction, where the actual amount of hours that they're spending their money on really does not reflect the amount of money they're spending. So it's those are the courses that I feel need to be looked at, and I don't think they are value for money. And I think it's very difficult when you're a young person looking at options where to go to know that. It's very difficult to know, and those are the courses I think really shouldn't be on offer.
But you would cut the number of foreign students?
Not at all. No, I wouldn't cut them. No, I don't think. I wouldn't cut the number of foreign students. Why would I want to do that? Is that if people
policy to reduce immigration?
Well, I'm really glad you said that, because I'm sure that intelligent people here must realise that most people you meet from UKIP are far more likely to be like me and they're not the people that you view through the media prism, which really is our only outlet, other than coming and doing lots of talks and meeting people. And that's not what we are about at all. Yes, we do want to. We do believe in having points-based systems for workers. That's a different thing to students. So students coming into this country, really, it's up to the individual universities and other establishments what they want to charge, how many people they want to have, basically have on their courses. That's not a matter for any government. I really believe that's the individual establishment. So, that's got nothing to do with people coming into this country to live and work on a permanent basis.
So you would have an open door?
I'd let come back.
Would you like to
Well, I'm just a bit confused what the difference is between a foreign student and a foreign worker, because many students come in and then,
I'm sure we'll cover this at some point.
Well, I know perfectly well that obviously I'm here to answer all of these questions, and I'm certainly not wanting to hog any time, but there is a difference, because a foreign student comes over to this country to do a course, when they've done, which they pay a huge amount of money to do. When they've done the course, either they are, as they would have expected to go home with their degree and do then what they wish to do with it, or whatever that part would be, or they come into the category of foreign worker, and because I'm a member of UKIP, I have a global attitude to immigration. I believe it's about numbers and resources. I don't believe it should be biased towards the European Union. I think we should be looking to people from the whole world to come and live and work here, and that's where the numbers matter. And I believe in the Commonwealth and a global economy. I don't believe, of course, that we should just be tied to Europe, but that's a different question. But thank you for allowing me to clarify that.
And yeah, I wanted to pick up on something that a number of people have referred to in value for money. I mean, the question for the audience is, how much do you think that you actually pay a lecturer, for example? And Patricia mentioned that she felt that the heads, the deans of our universities are paid too much. Lecturers barely get £30,000, and even that is pro rata, dependent on how many hours they work. Now, the question for value for money is based on return on investment. So, if you are a lecturer and you're giving a lecture to 30 people, that's £30,000, that's £1,000 per student for you to give one lecture for the year. However, you've also taken into account the cost of the buildings, the subsidisation, the elements that come into your university education. Is it value for money that should come out of the taxpayer for people to go to university? And that is always an ongoing question. And if you have to battle economic problems, where do you cut the money from? Where do you take the money from so that people go to university for free?
But that's a bit like saying you shouldn't be contributing to the roads if you don't have a car. I mean, there are certain communal facilities that we all expect to contribute towards and to share. And I think
through council tax for that.
Well, I think that it should be fair for everybody, as you said earlier, to have the right to the education that's going to suit them without having to worry about that.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to say was that education is not just something you do when you're 18. I've done, I don't know, I've lost track how many degrees I've done and different things I've done, and sometimes I do them when I'm working, and sometimes I just, actually it's important that your workforce is continually learning. Lifelong learning is what we've got to do, because everybody else is doing it. If we don't do it, we're going to get left behind. And you need to have your skills up, everybody does. So I'd like to see a society which, we went towards it to a certain extent at one stage, where everybody thinks they're always learning. In every situation you learn and you learn and you keep learning right to the end. And that means you feel vibrant. It's very healthy to learn. People apparently who study or who want to learn things actually keep their brain going longer. They're going to be more healthy in old age. And as we get a demographic shift and there are more older people, they need to be included in that equation, and certainly not taking out debt, which was suggested by one party, I think, at one stage, where older people take debts to go to university. So I think we need lifelong learning of all kinds, at all levels, so that we can all keep retraining and responding to what's happening in the world.
And does the audience have any sort of comments you'd like to make on this?
Just a question on lifelong learning. Do we know what the changes in terms of mature students coming to university over the last few years since 2010?
There's been a significant increase in people applying for part-time universities and mature students applying, because we introduced loans for part-time students as well, which has facilitated better lifelong learning.
Firstly, this is just a response to the candidate from UKIP. We actually call them international students here. would you not say that education is a public good, no matter really who's paying for it? It's in the interests of the public.
That's
in the
exactly what I
interests
have
of
said.
all.
That's exactly what I have said, that it's a public good and everybody should be entitled to it. And I have to sort of put my hand up and admit that I was a full-time lecturer for 15 years, so it's not a question of just a vague opinion. I completely agree with that, and that's what I said. So yes, simple answer, yes.
There's one more question at the back.
I was just interested in terms of like the differentiation between degrees. Would you put a degree in maths at the same level as a degree in hairdressing in terms of funding? Is that fair?
Within my own party, we recently passed a policy where we said that we would focus on STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering and maths. That's because we have a national skill shortage in those areas. However, that's due to be reviewed on an ongoing basis. Ultimately, degrees aren't necessarily more valuable or less valuable, but it depends on what that person with that degree can contribute to the workforce going forward, and we have to treat university in that way.
Just can I just come back on that? I think it's quite an interesting question, and it's certainly not my party's policy or the government's policy, but I think that the question is do you give discounts, in other words, for degree courses where there's a shortage in that area? In fact, the government sort of does, and Kelly talked about STEM subjects. There was some work launched only this week on that area, because we have got a shortage, particularly actually girls doing going into technology and engineering, and we particularly want to sort of equal up the gender gap there. But I think it's quite an interesting point actually, but that is where business comes in. So business sponsorship of degrees and apprenticeships which lead to degrees is one other alternative way of doing it. So business, industry that is desperate for graduates in that area are starting to sponsor it. The university sector actually has been, I think, quite slow to catch up with the changing pattern of degrees. And I think they're just starting to catch up now. Business is getting there. It'll take a bit of time for the universities to.
Sorry.
Brave new world for universities.
Sorry, this we could go on all night about it.
You are in the university.
Yeah. We have the second question. Second question, please.
Given the issues surrounding the living wage and zero-hour contracts, how would you protect the British worker?
And Milton, you can go first.
Yeah, that's right. The 0 hours contracts. I think what's quite interesting to me is that there's a group of people that absolutely love them, workers and employers, and there's a group of people who get abused by the system. I think the exclusivity is an issue. So having a contract where you can't work for somebody else, I think is a problem. And I think that the living wage is also something that's growing in credibility, if you like. Is minimum wage enough? Probably not. I think what is very striking, particularly if you live in an area like this, is how it affects people across the country, the regional variations. So the same is true of public sector wages. If you go to some parts of the country and you're a nurse, say, I say with some feeling, you know, your wages buy you a great deal. Down here in Guildford, they don't buy you very much. And I think actually there's more work to do to finesse actually getting minimum wage, living wage at the right level. Certainly the government is looking at the point about exclusivity of 0 hours contracts. In some areas, the hospitality industry, actually in some of the other service industries, it's quite difficult. But I think it's got to be a contract, i.e. a two-way thing. And at the moment, I think there are some workers that are abused by it.
It was Labour who are really still pushing for, you know, a cut in the 0 hours contract and for a living wage in fact. So how would you vote it?
Yeah, so many 0 hours contracts are exploitative of workers. I mean, okay, it might work well for barristers or people like that, but most 0 hours contracts are about a power relationship that's uneven between the employer and the employee. We have seen people now unemployed who are having their benefits sanctioned because they're refusing to take certain 0 hours contracts. 0 hours contracts are about a lack of power. So Labour would ban exploitative 0 hours contracts, but we would make sure that the minimum wage is actually enforced. as well as the living wage, because minimum wage is being undercut by some employers because they're including tied accommodation as part of your wages and then taking that from them. And it's being used to exploit immigrant workers as well, to undercut British workers. So we need to make sure that all employers are properly paying minimum wage, and if they're not, they're prosecuted for it. I mean, Labour on Surrey County Council has tried to pass a motion to make that council, this council, living wage council, and it was opposed by the Conservatives. So there are people living in Surrey who are not earning a wage that gives them dignity, lets them put food on the table and a roof over their families' heads. And Surrey is one of the richest countries in one of the richest countries in the world. So we should be giving people dignity at work.
And how do you protect the British worker?
Well, I want to say that zero-hour contracts should be banned, but I have met people, mostly students, over the last few months that tell me that they do like them. So I have to accept that they do suit some people. And I know some people that are quite happy to work, for example, in McDonald's and be told 1 week they've got this number of hours, the next week they have only that. They like the flexibility. So I agree that they do work for some people. The problem is they work best of all for big business. They don't really have any interest whatsoever in that worker's rights. So trying to balance the payments that life takes from us, whether it be rent or trying to get a mortgage or something like that, is completely impossible. So I don't like that, and I don't think that's acceptable. But what I also don't like is I think that the improving employment figures, which I heartily want to commend, do hide these kind of workers, and they hide those contracts which are really not preparing anybody for a decent life ahead. So I'm not happy about that. I don't think there's a protection built in there. And of course, the people who are most exploited of all are low-skilled workers, including low-skilled immigrants coming into this country. So they're not protected by big business, and they're not protected by the law.